Welcome to my talk on attitudes toward client-side scanning for child sexual abuse material, terrorism, drug trafficking, drug use, and tax evasion in Germany. Say that 10 times fast. I wrote this paper together with Fabian, Otto, Maximilian, Häring, and Matthew Smith. For years now, there's been a growing divide in the digital realm between privacy and law enforcement. On the one side, there's an ever-growing number of perpetrators of serious crimes, child abuse being chief among them, who use privacy measures such as end-to-end encrypted chats to evade prosecution. And on the other hand, there is the reasonable apprehension that giving companies or governments the possibility of evading encryption altogether might lead towards a slippery slope to a totalitarian kind of surveillance. And this divide is commonly referred to as the crypto wars. Scanning content that users upload into the cloud for illicit materials has been a practice that's been common for many years now. Google and Apple, for example, do it. But recently, there's been a push towards taking these scanning measures from the cloud side onto the end user's devices, which is referred to as client-side scanning. And the pushback against this has been fierce, especially among the security and privacy community. We are all aware that the implications for individual privacy on the client side are different and much more invasive than they are on cloud side. However, proponents of this technology think that this is necessary to keep people, especially children, safe, while the opponents argue that this kind of mass surveillance puts everyone at a much greater risk. Either way, both sides of the divide argue that they want what's best for the people. But what is it that the people think about all this? There have been some studies done by interest groups, such as, for example, ECPAT, which is an NGO that's concerned with fighting the sexual exploitation of children. And they found that in representative samples across several European countries, there has been high support for scanning measures to combat child abuse online. They report that 68% of the participants overall were supportive, and in their German sample specifically, they saw 65% support. However, when looking at the way that they asked their questions, we were worried that they might have framed the problem from a certain perspective and thus influenced participants. And we also wanted to investigate whether changing context variables or explaining the technology better might influence participants' attitudes. So we designed a survey which first presented participants with an introduction, a high-level introduction to client-side scanning, and this was followed by one of two primers. Either a negative primer in which we focused on the potential dangers that technology such as this might have, such as the mass surveillance aspects that's very easily abused, or the potentially devastating effects that false positives could have on individuals, or a positive primer where we stress that this technology may have the potential to solve or even prevent horrific crimes such as child abuse. There was a third group of participants who served as the control group who received neither primer. And then afterwards, we asked participants to rate the approval of these scanning measures in several scenarios with changing context variables, and we asked them to rate their acceptance for different crimes, again, CSAM, terrorism, drug trafficking, drug use, and tax evasion. We conducted the survey with a representative sample of the German population with 1,062 participants. And the sample had representative distributions in demographics across age, gender, and region. We conducted the survey online via OmniQuest, which is a platform that offers professional target audience research. And we analyzed most of the data using an ordinal logistic regression. Our main research question was this. Is the move from cloud-side to client-side scanning as salient to the general public as it seems to be to the S&P community? And the answer to this question is a resounding no. As you can see here, for both client-side and cloud-side scans, there were about 50% of people who reported that they would approve of such scanning measures. That's the yellow and the light green bars are approval and somewhat approving and somewhat approving. And then there were about 20% who were unsure. That's the blue-green bar in the middle is neither, and the dark blue and purple are somewhat disapproving and disapproving, respectively. By the way, this figure, there's no copy-paste error or other mistake. The numbers were actually this equal, so just so you know. These results were independent of priming. As you can see here, the priming groups made no difference. Although it seems in this figure that the participants who received a negative primer were slightly less supportive of scanning measures, but this difference was not statistically significant. So it seems that in general, our participants were in favor of these scanning measures. However, as mentioned, we did ask people to rate their willingness to accept scans for a variety of law infractions in addition to CSAM, which is obviously the most cited use case for client-side scanning. And here you can see that the difference in acceptance, the differences are stark. For CSAM, over 60% of our participants reported that they would agree to scanning measures, which is in line with ECPAT. To remind you, they saw 65% support in their German sample. But the support drops for other content scans, less so for terrorism and drug trafficking, which are more severe infractions, and more so for tax evasion and drug use. However, as you can see, even for tax evasion and drug use, there were still about 30% of participants who said that they would support scanning measures for these crimes. So as I said, we had a German sample, but this discussion, as many things involving technological advancements, sees a very large, if not dominating influence of US companies and policies. And we wanted to use our chance here to investigate the influence of these US American policies, to investigate how this influence was perceived in a country outside of the US. So we asked participants to rate their acceptance of scans if they were carried out and evaluated by private US-based companies as opposed to law enforcement agencies. And the influence of private companies does seem to cause some tension. Participants were more likely to accept scanning from their own government, although the effect size here is small, but it is still statistically significant. And this may in part be down to trust. Our participants reported an overall high level of trust in the German government and in its law enforcement agencies. And this self-reported level of trust did had a statistically significant correlation with the support for surveillance measures. So if participants had a higher level of trust, they were more likely to be accepting of these scanning measures. So to wrap this up, I would like to offer some concluding thoughts. We've seen in our sample broad support for surveillance measures to counter serious crimes, and this has been independent of framing. And this makes a strong argument that we should not delude ourselves into thinking that this support comes solely from the fact that people don't know the dangers of the technology that they are agreeing to. I also want to stress that we do not think that these results are a permission or a carte blanche to implement such surveillance measures. What we see here is a majority opinion, and this is significant in as much as we all live in a democratic society. But I think we all know that the majority is not necessarily right. Also, the declining support for lesser crimes underlines that the apprehension of the tech community towards a possible slippery slope is indeed justified and may be shared by the general population. In the end, we think that both sides of these wars might benefit from acknowledging the nuances of support in the general population. Proponents should be aware that support may drop if people feel that the technology moves outside of its intended scope, and opponents should be aware that there is a big chunk of people out there who are at least willing to accept these scanning measures as a solution if they don't see any alternatives. So this is obviously not the end of this discussion. In fact, we would hope that it's only the beginning of new aspects in this ongoing debate. And as such, we are in the process of gathering a representative sample for the US. And we would be very grateful for your opinions as experts. So if you have opinions or feelings on this matter, we would be very grateful if you would agree to take part in our survey. It takes about 10 minutes. Yeah. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'd be happy to take any questions now.
Okay, sure. We have a time for a question or two.
Hi, great talk. For the comparison on negative priming versus positive, did you look at cloud versus client side, or just across the board?
You mean the in the primer themselves?
Yeah, you have the figure like on like slide 3 or 4.
You can see here the text that we gave participants for positive and negative priming. This was we presented these texts before the scenarios in which we varied the variables such as client and cloud-side scanning. So I guess the answer would be across the board.
Okay. Was there a difference between the response on, like, if you negatively primed it, did you get a different result for client-side scanning versus cloud? Okay. No. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Did you take a look at any generational differences? You know, so-called digital natives having grown up in a fishbowl environment, were they more open to scanning?
We did look at age differences, but there was no significance in differences.
Okay, thank you.
The board. Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's thank Lisa again. There's more questions you can ask at the end.